Nicole only noticed the loose thread on her blazer because it wouldn't stop catching on the corner of her drafting table. Every time she shifted, that thin gray strand snagged and pulled a little more, curling away from the cuff like the beginning of an unraveling. She smoothed it down with her thumb, pretending she could press it back into place, but the weave had already given in. The fabric was never going to be quite the same again. Outside the wide, dusty windows of the new office in Miami, late afternoon light bounced off car hoods and glass storefronts, turning everything into a blur of gold and white. The air that drifted in through the half-installed window frame was thick and warm, carrying the distant smell of the ocean and the sharper scent of fresh paint. Somewhere in the building, a power drill whined and then cut off, leaving behind a faint echo that made her ears ring. She stood in the middle of the room with a roll of blueprints tucked under one arm, her other hand automatically finding the loose thread and twisting it. 26 years old and back in the city she thought she'd left for good, Nicole Alvarez had the kind of beauty people called effortless, even though nothing about her felt effortless anymore. Dark brown hair fell in a loose knot at the base of her neck, a few strands clinging to the sheen of sweat on her temples. Her skin was a warm olive tone that held onto the sun easily, and her hazel eyes, usually sharp, observant, always clocking angles and lines, looked a little tired around the edges, shadows hinting at the months she'd rather not remember. She had pictured this moment differently. In another version of her life, she would have flown in from Texas just for a visit, wearing the ring that now existed only as a pale circle on her finger, introducing her fiancé and her business partner to the city where she'd grown up. They would have toasted to expansions and milestones, wedding dates and project launches. Her voice would have been light when she said things like, "We built this together," and "I can't believe how far we've come." Instead, she was here alone, in a blazer that was too warm for Miami humidity, with a blazer sleeve that had started to come apart. The memory slid in like a draft under a door. The sharp smell of whiskey from that night in Austin. The way the office lights had reflected on the polished concrete floor. Her fiancé's voice, too careful, when he said they needed to talk. And then the second voice, the one she had trusted with budgets and deadlines and half of their company, breaking on the words, "It just happened." She had laughed at first. It was a brittle sound that didn't belong to her, the kind that cracked and then burned. By the time the sun came up, there was nothing left, not the relationship, not the company, not any version of the future she'd been planning for 5 years. Lawyers would handle the paperwork. Friends would send half-hearted texts. And Nicole, whose entire life was built on structure and design, would do the only thing that made sense when the foundation collapsed: go back to the place where the blueprint had started. Nicole? One of the workers, a man with paint spattered across his t-shirt, waved from the doorway. "We're about to bring in the glass panels. You still want them set flush with the floor?" "Yeah," she answered automatically, twisting the thread a little tighter around her finger. "Clean lines. No threshold." He nodded and disappeared again, leaving her alone with the echo of her own words. Clean lines. No threshold. It sounded like something she wished she could say about her life, too: no breaks, no uneven edges, no invisible step that could trip her on the way through. Her phone buzzed on the makeshift table, an old wooden door balanced on stacks of unopened boxes. The screen lit up with a notification from the calendar app she hadn't bothered to update yet: wedding final menu meeting, 4 p.m. The letters glowed bright against the cracked glass, a spiderweb fracture that cut straight through the word wedding. Nicole stared at it for a second, her throat tightening. A familiar chill moved through her despite the heat, like someone had opened a freezer door somewhere inside her chest. She dismissed the notification with more force than necessary and flipped the phone face down, the soft thud on the wood louder than it should have been in the quiet room. She took a slow breath, tasting paint and dust and the faint bitterness of coffee gone cold. This office, with its unfinished walls and exposed wires and half-installed lighting, was supposed to be her reset button. A blank space where she could design something that belonged only to her. No shared signatures on contracts. No smiles that could switch off overnight. Just her name on the lease and her hands on the work. The loose thread snagged again as she moved, this time on the edge of a metal ladder. She muttered under her breath, freeing it with careful fingers. It left a tiny gap in the seam, a shadow line she couldn't unsee. That was the problem with being an architect, you noticed every flaw. Even the ones no one else would ever care about. Careful with that step, one of the guys called from across the room. We still need to secure it. I'm fine, she replied, stepping over a pile of tiles. The floor was a patchwork of potential, scattered tools, taped off measurements, stacks of materials waiting for their turn. Her ankle turned slightly on a misplaced piece of wood, and she felt a small jolt in her muscles, the kind that made your heart stutter even if nothing really happened. For a second, she closed her eyes. The air wrapped around her, heavy and warm, full of noise and promise and the restless, humming energy of a city that never truly slept. Miami sounded different than Texas. Less polished, more alive. Car horns in the distance, a snatch of music from somewhere on the street, a shout of laughter from a passerby outside. Underneath it all, the soft whoosh of her own breath in her ears. When she opened her eyes, the room looked the same, but something inside her had shifted a fraction to the left. The armor she'd been dragging around since the night everything broke in Austin had a hairline crack. Not much. Just enough for light to find its way in if it wanted to. By early evening, most of the workers had left, promising to be back first thing in the morning. The office was quieter now, filled with the low hum of the air conditioning unit that had finally been switched on. The temperature dropped a few degrees, and goosebumps rose along Nicole's forearms. She stayed behind to double-check measurements, her steps soft against the concrete. The smell of dust was fading, replaced slowly by the cleaner, sharper scent of new materials. Fresh wood. Glass cleaner. Something citrusy from the cleaning spray someone had used on the front door. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was a number with a Texas area code she recognized immediately. She didn't pick up. Instead, she watched the screen vibrate its way toward the edge of the table, then caught it at the last second, fingers closing around the cool metal frame. The loose thread brushed her wrist as she moved, light as a whisper. She thought of calling her mother, telling her that the office was coming together, that she'd be busy soon, that everything would be fine. She thought of deleting every trace of the past year from her phone, as if erasing files could erase the way her stomach still clenched when she saw a certain brand of cologne or a certain shade of lipstick. Instead, she turned the phone off and slipped it into her bag. Enough for today, she murmured to the empty room, her voice covered by the low rumble of thunder somewhere far away over the water. On the drive home, the city slid by in flashes of neon signs and palm trees bending slightly in the breeze. The steering wheel was warm under her hands. The air outside the car was thick, but inside, the AC blew cool against her face, carrying the faint scent of the new leather seats she definitely hadn't needed but bought anyway, as if changing her surroundings could trick her into believing she'd changed too. At a red light, she looked down at her hands on the wheel. The tan line where her engagement ring had been was still there, ghost pale and stubborn. She rubbed her thumb over it, feeling nothing and everything all at once. She had been 17 when she'd last felt this unsteady and this awake at the same time. Back then, Miami had smelled like sunscreen and cafeteria fries and the perfume Louise wore that Nicole could pick out in a crowded hallway without even trying. She didn't let herself go deeper into that memory. Not tonight. Not when she was already balancing on the edge of too many things. The light turned green, and she drove on. On the other side of the city, in a hospital that never truly slept, Dr. Louise Bennett leaned back in the hard plastic chair of the break room and closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Just 3. That was all she usually allowed herself between patients, an inhale, an exhale, and the quiet hum of the vending machine filling the silence she refused to name as loneliness. She was 26, with dark hair pulled into a low bun at the nape of her neck, a few strands sticking to her forehead from the long shift. There was a smudge of ink on her knuckles from jotting down a note too quickly, and faint marks from the elastic of her mask still pressed against her face. Her skin was fairer than Nicole's, with the kind of softness that made people underestimate how long she could stay on her feet. Her eyes were deep brown, steady and focused when she worked, but now they looked a little softer, shadows pooling in the corners. The break room smelled like stale coffee and microwaved leftovers, with a hint of antiseptic sneaking in from the hallway. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed quietly, casting everything in a pale, almost unreal glow. Louise's stethoscope was looped loosely around her neck, the cool rubber resting against the thin fabric of her scrubs. Her phone lay on the table in front of her, screen showing a photo of a fluffy white Persian cat sprawled across a couch, eyes closed, paws in the air like he owned the world. Underneath the picture, the contact name read, Mr. Darcy. She smiled despite herself, thumb hovering over the screen. She had a cat sitter sending her updates, but each photo hit her with the same little ache. Home. Quiet. A book left open on the arm of the sofa. A cup of tea going cold on the coffee table. A life that fit into well-defined edges. The life she'd built was safe. Predictable. Full of purpose, but short on anything that might crack her open. She locked the phone before the feeling could grow teeth. A nurse poked her head through the door. Dr. Bennett? We've got a new admission in the ER. Construction accident. Possible ankle fracture, maybe more. They're bringing her in now. I'm coming, Louise said, rising to her feet. The chair scraped softly against the linoleum floor. Her body protested for a second, a sharp reminder of the hours she'd already worked, but she pushed it aside. That was the thing about medicine, it didn't wait for you to be ready. As she walked down the hallway, the sounds of the hospital folded around her. The steady beep of monitors. The murmur of voices at the nurse's station. The squeak of a gurney wheel in need of oil. The air was cooler here, pumped through vents that hummed quietly above her head. The smell sharpened into something she knew like a second language, antiseptic, latex, the faint metal tang that hinted at blood and sterile instruments. She straightened her shoulders, slipping fully into the role that made sense, professional, calm, untouchable. The armor she wore wasn't visible like a blazer, but it was just as real. It lived in her posture, in the way she kept her voice even, in the way she didn't let herself remember the girl who once made her feel like the world could crack open in a single glance. At 17, Louise had loved like it was a secret game only she and Nicole knew the rules to. Now, she loved in careful fragments, her patients, her cat, the city skyline she saw on her drive home just before sunrise. It was easier not to want more when there was no one around to offer it. The automatic doors to the ER slid open with a soft hiss. When Nicole's gurney rolled in, a blur of denim, dust, and frustration, Louise stepped forward, latex gloves snapping lightly as she pulled them on. She could see the tightness around the woman's mouth, the way her fingers curled around the edge of the stretcher, knuckles white. Pain, yes. But also something deeper, like someone who had forgotten how to ask for help. Hi, I'm Dr. Bennett, she began, voice steady. We're going to take good care of. Her eyes met Nicole's. For a heartbeat, the hospital sounds dimmed. The world narrowed to hazel and brown and the shock of recognition slamming through both of them like a sudden change in temperature. Louise's breath caught, just for a moment, the cool air of the ER turning sharp in her lungs. Nicole's hand tightened on the side of the gurney, that loose thread from her blazer brushing against the sheet. She knew that face. Older, sharpened by experience, but still hers. The girl from the school courtyard, from the library corner, from the half-lit hallway behind the gym. The one who had tasted like promises and fear and summer. Nicole? Louise's voice came out softer than she intended. A hint of disbelief flickered in Nicole's eyes, followed quickly by something that looked dangerously like hope. Her throat worked around the word before she managed to say it. Louise. The nurse beside them glanced between the two, then looked away, pretending not to notice the invisible shift in the room. Louise forced herself back into motion, fingers moving with practiced efficiency as she checked Nicole's ankle, her pulse, her breathing. But her mind was not as obedient. It was busy lining up two images, the teenager in a faded uniform shirt, laughing at something whispered between classes, and the woman in front of her now, jaw set, a small tremor in her hands betraying everything she was trying to hide. "How bad is it?" Nicole asked, her voice rough around the edges. The air smelled like disinfectant and something citrusy from the sanitizer Louise had just used, overlaying the faint scent of dust and sweat that still clung to Nicole's clothes. "We'll get X-rays to be sure," Louise said, her fingers careful and gentle. "Does this hurt?" She pressed lightly along the bone, and Nicole sucked in a breath, eyes squeezing shut for a second. When she opened them again, Louise was still watching her, something unspoken hanging in the space between them. "It's manageable," Nicole said, even though her knuckles were white. "You don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt," Louise replied quietly. The words landed heavier than she meant. They weren't just about the ankle, and they both knew it. For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the overhead lights and the soft rustle of the curtain being pulled halfway around the bed. Nicole's gaze flicked to the floor, to the loose thread curling against the cuff of her blazer. She twisted it once, twice, feeling it bite into her skin. Louise followed the movement with her eyes and remembered, with a clarity that made her chest ache, the way Nicole used to twist the strap of her backpack when she was nervous. The same gesture, years later, in a different costume. "I'm going to order those X-rays," Louise said, stepping back, the air between them cooling by a degree. "I'll be right back." Nicole nodded, but her eyes lingered on Louise's retreating figure, on the line of her shoulders, on the way her ponytail brushed the collar of her scrubs as she walked away. The ER noise rushed back in, beeps, footsteps, someone calling for a chart, and yet everything felt slightly out of focus. The nurse adjusted Nicole's blanket, tucking it around her legs. "You okay?" she asked, voice professional but kind. Nicole exhaled slowly, staring at the edge of the curtain where a strip of fluorescent light spilled through. "Yeah," she said, even though her heart was racing. "I just didn't expect to see someone I used to know." The curtain swayed slightly as someone passed by, the fabric brushing her hand like a nearly there touch. On the other side of the room, Louise paused with her hand on the computer mouse, her reflection faint in the dark monitor before it flickered to life. She could hear the distant echo of her own voice from years ago, saying goodbye in a hallway that smelled like floor polish and teenage heartbreak. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't planned for any crack in the careful life she'd built with night shifts and rented apartments and a cat who greeted her at the door. "Dr. Bennett?" a nurse prompted gently. "About the X-ray order." Louise blinked and nodded, fingers moving over the keyboard. The symbol on the screen blurred for a second before sharpening again. She told herself she would walk back in there as a doctor and nothing else. But when she pushed the curtain aside a few minutes later and found Nicole watching the strip of light on the floor like it contained every missed conversation between them, something in her resolve loosened. Their eyes met again. Louise opened her mouth to say something ordinary, something safe, but the words caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. Nicole's fingers shifted on the edge of the bed, as if she had almost reached out for something and then thought better of it. The moment stretched, humming with all the things neither of them said. And then someone called Louise's name from the hallway, pulling her attention away. She turned her head for half a second, then looked back at Nicole, an apology already in her eyes. The words she might have spoken stayed there, unvoiced, resting between them like a held breath in a hand that almost moved. Nicole hadn't planned on seeing Louise again so soon. In her mind, the hospital visit would mark a single, unexpected intersection, the kind life throws at you only to pull you back into your separate lanes. But the next morning, as she limped into the lobby for her follow-up X-ray, the automatic doors slid open with a soft sigh, and there she was. Louise stood at the nurse's station reviewing a chart, a pen tucked behind her ear, the blue glow of the computer screen tracing the angles of her face. Her scrubs were a deeper shade of midnight today, and the slight messiness of her bun suggested she'd already lived a full day before 10 a.m. Even from across the room, Nicole could recognize that quiet intensity she'd always had, the way she concentrated fully, the way she moved with unintentional grace, the way she seemed to live half in her body and half in her thoughts. Nicole felt the thread from her blazer tickle her wrist again, a reminder she didn't need. She wasn't the only one trying to pretend she'd come undone gracefully. "Hey," she said softly as she approached. Louise's head lifted at the sound of her voice. The shift in her expression was small but unmistakable, a flicker of warmth, surprise, and something like relief passing through her eyes. "Hi," she said, and her voice was lighter than yesterday's. "You're back." "Doctor's orders," Nicole replied, forcing a smile. "Apparently they want to make sure I'm still in one piece." There was a beat where neither of them spoke, but the quiet didn't feel awkward. It just existed, like an echo from years ago that had followed them into adulthood. Louise cleared her throat. "Let me take you to imaging." She walked beside Nicole, adjusting her pace to match the slower steps. The hallway air was cool, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner and warm paper from the nearby printer. Their hands didn't touch, but they were close enough that Nicole felt the ghost of Louise's body heat brushing along her arm. "Long night?" Nicole asked. "Long week," Louise answered. "But I've gotten used to it. Coffee is my religion now." Nicole laughed before she could stop herself, the sound bouncing lightly off the walls. "Still terrible at taking breaks, I see," she said. Louise shot her a sideways look, something playful threading through it. "And you still think you know me that well?" The words were teasing, but they nudged something tender between them. Nicole felt it land, warm and disarming. "You're right," she said quietly. "I don't." But the truth pulsed beneath her words, "I used to." When they reached imaging, Louise lingered by the doorway instead of passing Nicole off to another tech. "I can stay," she offered, tucking that stray piece of hair behind her ear. "If you want." Nicole opened her mouth to say something casual, something safe, but what came out was honest instead. "Yeah. I'd like that." Louise's lips curved in a small, soft smile. The technician took over, guiding Nicole through the motions. The cold surface of the X-ray table pressed against her palms, and she tried to focus on the hum of the machine instead of the steady rhythm of Louise's presence just behind the glass window. Every now and then, she caught Louise watching her, subtle glances, thoughtful, like she was seeing something she wasn't sure she had permission to acknowledge. When it was over, Louise helped her down gently. Her hand hovered for a moment at Nicole's waist, close enough to steady her, far enough to be respectful. But even the air between them felt charged. "You good?" Louise asked, voice low. "Yeah," Nicole said, though her ankle protested and her heart definitely wasn't behaving. "I'm fine." They walked back toward the nurse's station, and just before they reached it, Nicole's stomach growled loud enough to cut through the steady beeps of the monitors. Louise's eyebrows rose. "Did you eat today?" Nicole grimaced. "Coffee counts, right?" "No," Louise said immediately. "Absolutely not. That's a crime against your blood sugar." Their eyes met, and something familiar, something teasing and old and deeply them, passed between them. Without waiting for a reply, Louise tilted her head toward the staff cafe. "Come on," she said. "I've got 15 minutes. I can at least make sure you don't pass out on my shift." It wasn't an invitation so much as a natural extension of who she was. Nicole followed. The cafe was warm and smelled like toast, brewed coffee, and something sweet that reminded Nicole of cinnamon rolls. The fluorescent lights softened in this corner of the hospital, reflecting off chrome appliances and small round tables. Louise moved easily behind the counter, retrieving 2 cups, pouring water into a kettle like she'd done it 1,000 times. "You're making me tea?" Nicole asked, amused. "You look like you need something gentle," Louise replied, sliding her a cup with a little paper tag hanging off the side. "Chamomile." Nicole's fingers brushed Louise's as she took the cup. The touch was brief, barely there, but it sizzled under her skin like a secret. They sat at a table near the window. Outside, a row of palm trees waved lazily in the breeze, their fronds tapping lightly against the glass like soft fingertips. The air conditioning hummed overhead. Nicole wrapped both hands around the warm cup, letting the heat seep through her fingers. "So," Louise said after a moment. "Miami again?" "Yeah," Nicole answered. "Starting over?" "Not easy," Louise murmured. "No," Nicole agreed, her throat tightening with everything she wasn't saying. Louise didn't push. She never did. Instead, she watched Nicole with an expression that felt like sunlight cutting through morning fog, warm, patient, unhurried. "I'm glad you're here," Louise said finally, voice barely above a whisper. Nicole swallowed. "I didn't think anyone would be." "I am." Silence pooled between them, but it wasn't the empty kind. It was the full kind. The kind that held things. Then the overhead speaker crackled with a page, "Dr. Bennett to exam room 3. Louise exhaled softly, like the universe had interrupted them on purpose. "I have to go," she said, standing. "But, you should stay a minute. Finish your tea." Nicole nodded, unsure how to speak around the sudden rush of disappointment. Louise hesitated. "Hey," she added, lowering her voice. "I'm off tomorrow at 5. If you still need a ride home, or someone to help with the ankle, or you just want company." Nicole looked up at her, heart thudding. "Tomorrow," she repeated, the words settling warm in her chest. "Yeah. I'd like that." Louise's smile was small, shy around the edges, but real. "Then tomorrow." She turned to leave, but just before stepping through the doorway, she glanced back. The light from the cafe window caught the edge of her face, softening her features. She looked like someone standing on the edge of a memory they weren't sure they were allowed to claim. Nicole's fingers tightened on the warm cup. Tomorrow suddenly felt close enough to touch. By 5 the next afternoon, Miami was wrapped in a soft, warm glow, the kind that made the air feel almost tangible, like light had weight. Nicole stood outside the hospital entrance with her tote bag slung over one shoulder, the loose thread on her blazer still dangling like a quiet reminder that she hadn't put herself fully back together yet. Her ankle throbbed faintly, but she ignored it. What she couldn't ignore was the pulse in her throat. Louise stepped through the sliding doors a moment later, the automatic lights brushing her face in a pale gold wash. Her hair was down now, falling in loose waves around her shoulders, and she'd changed into jeans and a soft charcoal t-shirt. The casualness hit Nicole harder than she expected. Something about seeing Louise outside the rigid frame of the hospital made everything feel closer, more real, more dangerous in a way she couldn't name. "You didn't have to wait outside," Louise said, a teasing smile tugging at her mouth. "I wanted to," Nicole replied before she could soften the honesty of it. Louise's breath caught, not visibly, but enough that Nicole felt it like a shift in the air between them. Without speaking, Louise gestured toward her car, and they walked side by side, their arms close enough that the faint warmth of Louise's skin reached Nicole in gentle waves. Inside the car, the scent of pine air freshener mixed with something warm and distinctly Louise, maybe her shampoo, maybe her skin. Nicole buckled her seatbelt, trying to focus on anything other than how intimately familiar the air felt. "How's the ankle?" Louise asked as she started the engine. "Better," Nicole said. "Walking is still an adventure." Louise's eyes flicked briefly to Nicole's legs, as if confirming the truth, before she forced her gaze back to the road. "We'll get you through it," she said softly. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the hum of the AC filling the spaces where words didn't know how to live yet. Nicole looked out the window, watching palm trees blur by, feeling Louise's presence like a current buckling just under the surface. "I didn't know you were back in Miami," Louise said finally. "I didn't know either," Nicole answered. "Not until I had nowhere else to go." Louise's fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "I'm sorry." Nicole shook her head. "You don't have to be." Louise didn't argue, but the weight of her empathy lingered, settling into the car like a warm shadow. Traffic was slow, a line of brake lights stretching ahead. Louise glanced at Nicole's ankle. "This can't be comfortable." "It's not terrible," Nicole said. "Just stiff." "Let me help you inside when we get there," Louise murmured. "If you want." Nicole's heart stuttered. "I want." The words floated between them, simple but loaded. When they arrived at Nicole's building, Louise turned off the engine but didn't move. The twilight glow pooled around them, softening every contour, making the car feel too small, too intimate. Louise looked at Nicole, her expression searching. "Ready?" she asked. Nicole nodded, but she wasn't sure she was. Louise opened Nicole's door and offered her hand, not assuming, just offering. Nicole hesitated for a breath, then placed her palm into Louise's. The contact was electric. Warm. Familiar. Like something remembered by the body before the mind could catch up. They walked slowly toward the entrance, Louise supporting her lightly, not holding, not gripping, just guiding, the space between their bodies shimmering with a tension they both felt and neither spoke. Inside the apartment, Nicole flicked on the lights, revealing a space still half unpacked, boxes stacked like unfinished sentences. The air smelled faintly of cardboard and the lemon cleaner she'd used earlier. "Sorry for the mess," Nicole said, embarrassed. Louise looked around, then at her. "It feels like someone's starting something new." The words landed like a gentle hand on Nicole's ribs. "Can I get you something to drink?" Nicole asked, needing movement to ground herself. Louise nodded. "Water's fine." Nicole limped to the kitchen, acutely aware of Louise watching her. She filled 2 glasses, the cold water splashing softly against the sides. When she turned back, Louise was standing closer than before, hands tucked into her pockets, shoulders relaxed, eyes warm with something she wouldn't quite name. "Thanks," she said, taking the glass. Their fingers brushed again, another spark, another shift, another almost. They talked while Nicole slowly eased herself onto the couch. The cushions dipped under her weight, and Louise instinctively reached out, not touching, just steadying the air near her arm, a gesture of pure instinct. "You okay?" she asked. Nicole nodded. "Yeah. Sit with me." Louise hesitated only a second before lowering herself beside Nicole. Not too close, but close enough that Nicole felt the warmth radiating from her thigh. The room was quiet, just the soft whir of the ceiling fan and the faint city noise drifting in through the balcony door. "So," Nicole said softly, "tell me about you." "Really about you?" Louise exhaled a small laugh. "There's not much to tell." "That's not true." Louise looked at her for a long moment, then leaned back, letting her shoulders sink into the couch. "Well," she said, "I work too much. I talk to my cat more than a person should. And I'm figuring things out." Nicole turned toward her. "Things like?" Louise's eyes dropped to Nicole's hand resting on the couch between them. Then slowly, she looked up. "Like what really matters." Nicole's pulse fluttered. "And what does?" Louise didn't answer right away. She shifted slightly, their knees brushing, light, accidental, but deliberate in the way neither pulled away. Louise's breath grew softer, slower. She leaned in a fraction, testing the air, waiting for permission that shimmered between them. Nicole mirrored her without thinking, drawn as if by gravity. Their faces were inches apart now, the warmth of Louise's breath brushing Nicole's cheek. The faint smell of peppermint lingered on it. The room felt hotter. Or maybe Nicole did. Her chest pressed forward with each breath, the neckline of her blouse fluttering slightly. "Nicole," Louise whispered, voice trembling with something tender and afraid. Nicole's hand moved on its own, fingertips brushing the back of Louise's forearm, a gentle, hesitant, question mark of a touch. Louise inhaled sharply. Her eyes closed for a moment, her jaw tightening like she was fighting something inside her, a memory, a fear, a longing. "You can tell me to stop," Nicole murmured. Louise opened her eyes, and whatever lived in them was unmistakably consent. "I don't want you to stop." The world narrowed to one point of gravity. Nicole lifted a trembling hand to Louise's face, her thumb grazing her cheekbone, the skin impossibly soft. Louise leaned into it slowly, like she had been waiting years for that exact touch. Their noses brushed first, light, testing. Then foreheads touched, breath mingling, both of them shaking in that quiet, sacred almost. And then Louise whispered, "Okay." It was all Nicole needed. The kiss was soft, barely a kiss at all, a cresting of breath, lips meeting in a hesitant, trembling press. A stolen moment, a rediscovered truth. Louise exhaled into it, her hand finding Nicole's waist with a tenderness that felt like a confession. Nicole's fingers slid into Louise's hair, feeling the strands slip through them like a memory she'd never forgotten. The warmth of Louise's mouth deepened for a moment, still gentle, still cautious, still wrapped in years of silence breaking open. Then they pulled back, breathless, foreheads touching again. Louise's eyes flicked open first, shining with something close to awe and fear. Nicole felt it too, a bright, terrifying exhilaration flooding her chest. Louise began, but the sentence collapsed. Nicole swallowed, her heart pounding. "It's okay," she whispered. "We don't have to figure it out right now." But something in Louise's expression shifted, panic threading through the softness. "I should go," she said suddenly. The words sliced the moment in half. Nicole straightened, stunned. "Louise." Louise stood quickly, grabbing her bag with hands that trembled. This was a lot. I just need some air." Nicole felt the loss like a cold wind against her skin. "Louise, wait." Louise paused at the door, her back rising and falling with shallow breaths. She didn't turn around. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "Maybe tomorrow." Then she left. The door clicked shut softly behind her. Nicole sat on the couch, fingers touching her lips where the warmth still lived, shock, confusion, and a fragile thread of hope twisting inside her like something pulled loose but not yet broken. Tomorrow. Maybe. The loose thread on Nicole's blazer had frayed even more overnight. She noticed it as soon as she woke, the thin gray strand curling like a question mark against her wrist. She stared at it far longer than a piece of fabric deserved. It wasn't just a thread anymore. It was the tiny, stubborn reminder that she had let something unravel last night, and then watched it walk out her door. The apartment felt different in the morning, heavier, quieter, the air still carrying the ghost of Louise's peppermint breath. Nicole moved slowly, her ankle stiff, each step a reminder of the accident that had pushed her back into the orbit of someone she wasn't emotionally prepared to face. The sunlight slanted across the floor in long strips, turning the dust floating in the air into tiny, suspended sparks. The silence almost felt like it was listening. She touched her lips once, then pulled her hand away, embarrassed by her own instinct. It had been just a kiss, gentle, small, cautious. But the impact was anything but small. It had shaken something awake inside her, a part of herself she hadn't visited in years. parts she didn't know how to trust anymore. By noon, she had thrown herself into work, emails, sketches, budget sheets, anything that could drown out the sharp edges of last night. But every line she drew felt crooked. Every measurement felt slightly off. She blamed the ankle, the heat, anything but the real reason. Louise hadn't called. And Nicole hadn't called either. She told herself it was about not wanting to push. Not wanting to complicate Louise's life. But deep down she knew the truth, she was terrified. Terrified of wanting something again. Terrified of losing something again. Terrified of being the one left standing with nothing but frayed edges. By the time her phone finally buzzed, she jumped so hard that the roll of blueprints slid off her desk. "Can you talk later?" "Around 7. Just 7 words. No punctuation. No warmth. No fear visible, but fear hiding in every space between the letters." Nicole typed a reply. "Of course." She deleted it. Another. "Sure." Deleted. Her fingers shook as she typed a third time. "Yes. Just tell me where." She stared at the screen for a long second before hitting send. Her heart didn't slow afterward. If anything, it raced faster. Louise spent her entire shift replaying the kiss in her mind. It should have been simple, one soft moment, one shared breath. But it wasn't simple, not for her. She held on to routines like shields, patient charts, vitals, protocols, steps, order. She lived in the space between urgency and exhaustion, where emotions had no room to breathe. Until last night. Until a kiss she'd wanted for nearly a decade caught her off guard and unmade her in one breath. She moved through the hospital corridors too quickly, as if speed could drown the noise inside her head. Nurses called her name, patients asked questions, alarms beeped. She responded perfectly, professionally, but none of it reached the part of her that was spinning. She kept seeing Nicole's face. The softness of her eyes before the kiss. The shock and hurt after it. Louise stopped by the staff bathroom, leaning her palms against the cool porcelain sink. She closed her eyes. Her pulse thudded in her throat. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, turning her reflection into something broken in fragments of light. Mr. Darcy's photo was on her phone screen again, her cat curled in a sunbeam, peaceful, predictable. A life lived inside safe lines. Lines that had protected her for years. But last night, she had stepped outside of them. And the fall felt both terrifying and magnetic. Her hands trembled as she texted Nicole. They met at a small cafe near the water, a quiet place where the hum of conversation and the clinking of cups softened the awkwardness waiting between them. The outdoor lights glowed amber against the evening air, and a faint breeze carried the scent of salt and brewing coffee. Nicole arrived first, her steps uneven but steady. She wore a soft blouse and dark jeans, simple but elegant, her hair pulled half back. The loose thread hung stubbornly from her blazer, brushing the back of her hand. Louise saw her from across the street and paused. She had forgotten how beautiful Nicole could be when she wasn't trying. The warmth in her eyes. The slight tilt of her head. The strength concealed in her vulnerability. She swallowed hard, then crossed. Nicole stood when she approached. "Hey." "Hey," Louise echoed, voice thin. They sat. The waiter approached, but both waved him off for now. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt like a held breath, full of things they didn't know how to name. Finally, Louise exhaled. "I'm sorry for leaving last night." Nicole looked down at her hands. "You don't need to apologize." "I do," Louise insisted quietly. "You didn't deserve that." Nicole's mouth softened. "We were both surprised." Louise shook her head, eyes darkening. "You know that's not true." I wasn't surprised. I was terrified. The confession hung between them, raw and trembling. Nicole's fingers brushed the frayed thread again, looping it around her thumb in a slow, anxious circle. She didn't look away. So was I. Louise's breath caught. Nicole. The waiter passed by, the faint aroma of roasted coffee following him, grounding them back in the moment. I never wanted to hurt you, Louise said. Not then. Not now. You didn't hurt me, Nicole whispered. You scared me. But I scared myself too. Louise's eyes flicked to the thread. You still do that, she said softly. Nicole blinked. Do what? That thing with your hands. You twist something when you're overwhelmed. Nicole paused, her fingers freezing mid-motion. It was such a small observation. So intimate. So precise. A memory of her she hadn't given aloud. And it undid her. You noticed that? She whispered. Louise's voice dropped to a careful murmur. I used to notice everything. Heat washed through Nicole's chest, not romantic heat, but the tender ache of being seen. Really seen. Louise, I don't want to pretend last night didn't mean something. It meant everything, Louise said before she could stop herself. Nicole's breath faltered. Louise looked away, swallowing hard. That's what scares me. Nicole reached across the table instinctively, but stopped short, her fingers hovering an inch from Louise's wrist. Asking. Not assuming. Louise looked at her hand. Slowly, so slowly she gave Nicole every chance to pull back, she turned her arm just enough for their fingertips to touch. Warm. Hesitant. Searching. Nicole felt the contact like a soft shock. Tell me what you're afraid of, she whispered. Louise looked at her, eyes shining under the cafe lights. That I'll let myself want something I can't have. Nicole's voice broke. Why can't you? Louise exhaled shakily. Because I don't know how to do this. Because my life is structured. Predictable. Safe. Because every time I've let someone in, it's ended. She closed her eyes for a beat. Because if I fall again, I don't know if I can get back up. Nicole's throat tightened. I'm terrified too. Louise's eyes opened, meeting hers. Then what do we do? Nicole's heart hammered. She leaned slightly forward. Louise mirrored her. Their faces were close, too close, not close enough. The world around them softened into background noise. But just as the universe seemed to lean toward them, a voice called from behind. Dr. Bennett? Louise jerked back at the sound. A colleague stood at a distance, waving politely, clearly recognizing her. Nicole stiffened. Louise's shoulders tensed. I have to say hello. I didn't know she was here. I'll wait, Nicole said, but her voice carried a wound she didn't hide well. Louise walked toward the colleague, posture straight, professional mask sliding back into place. Their conversation was brief, but Nicole watched the entire shift, the guard going up, the safe version of Louise returning, the version that didn't shake, didn't want, didn't risk. When Louise returned to the table, her eyes avoided Nicole's for a moment too long. You okay? Nicole asked quietly. Louise hesitated, then shook her head. I hate that I flinch like that. You don't owe me perfection, Nicole said softly. Just honesty. Louise looked at her then, really looked. And whatever fear was holding on to her loosened a fraction. I want this, she whispered. I want you. But I don't trust myself yet. Nicole's hand moved unconsciously toward hers. Then let me trust for both of us. Louise's breath shuddered out of her. A tear gathered at the corner of her eye, but she blinked it away quickly. I'm trying. I know, Nicole whispered. I know. Lights from the water reflected against the cafe windows, flickering across Louise's face. The loose thread brushed Nicole's wrist again, soft, restless, like a heartbeat trying to steady itself. Louise exhaled. I need time. But, tomorrow. Can we talk again tomorrow? Nicole's lips parted. I'd like that. Louise reached out as if to touch her cheek, stopped halfway, then lowered her hand, fingers curling inward with restraint. Tomorrow, she repeated, voice breaking on the word. Nicole nodded. Louise stood, hesitating just long enough for Nicole to feel the weight of everything unsaid. Good night, Louise whispered. Good night. Louise walked away, turning back once, just once, with an expression so full of longing it hurt to see. Nicole watched her disappear into the glow of streetlights. She looked down at the loose thread on her blazer. Still frayed. Still undone. Still waiting. Nicole barely slept. Morning light pressed softly through the curtains, warm and unhurried, but nothing inside her matched that gentleness. She sat at her dining table with untouched coffee, the surface rippling whenever her fingertips tapped against it. And there it was again, the loose thread on her blazer sleeve, brushing her skin whenever her hand moved, curling slightly as if waiting for her to make a choice. She traced it slowly, not twisting it this time, simply acknowledging it. Yesterday, she had nearly torn it off from anxious habit. Today, she didn't. Something in her felt steadier, not whole yet, but willing. Willing to try. Willing to risk. Willing to believe that some things fray only to make room for new stitching. By late afternoon, she found herself standing near the water where Louise had asked to meet, an inlet near the hospital, quiet and edged by low stone walls. The breeze carried a faint scent of salt and blooming jasmine from a nearby garden. Boats rocked lazily in the distance, and the sky smeared itself in melted peach and soft blue. Nicole swallowed. The air felt thick with possibility. Louise arrived slowly, her steps measured, as if she were walking towards something she feared and needed in equal measure. Her dark hair was pulled back loosely, strands lifting in the breeze. The soft navy of her scrubs jacket contrasted with the golden light, and her eyes, wide, searching, found Nicole instantly. For a moment, neither moved. Then Louise breathed out her name, barely a whisper, Nicole, and the sound alone loosened something deep inside Nicole's chest. They met in the middle of the walkway, hovering a few feet apart, the distance trembling with everything unfinished. Nicole tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers trembling. Louise noticed. Nicole saw her notice. Thanks for meeting me, Louise said, voice low, almost fragile. You asked, Nicole replied gently. I wasn't going to say no. Louise nodded, eyes drifting to the water. I owe you honesty. Real honesty. Last night. I panicked. I saw someone from work, and the part of me that spent years staying small just took over. She paused, choosing each word carefully. It wasn't about you. It was about being afraid of wanting you. Nicole stepped a little closer. Louise didn't move away. Fear doesn't make you weak, Nicole said. It makes you human. Louise's gaze flicked back to her, soft but sharp. I don't want to keep running from things that scare me. Not anymore. Then stop running, Nicole whispered. Louise inhaled shakily. I'm trying. But after high school, after losing you once, I built a life that couldn't break me. It also couldn't move you, Nicole replied. The words weren't an accusation, just truth offered gently, like a hand extended. Louise swallowed, her throat trembling. You're right. A silence fell between them, not empty, not tense, but alive, pulsing softly like a heartbeat shared. Last night, Louise continued, when I kissed you, I felt like something in me finally woke up. And when I pulled away, it wasn't because I didn't want it. It was because I wanted it too much. She took a breath, then stepped closer until their forearms nearly touched. I didn't feel safe with myself yet. Nicole's eyes softened. Do you now? Louise looked at her like she was memorizing her face. I don't know if anyone ever feels fully safe. But I feel willing. Nicole let out a shaky exhale. I can work with willing. They both laughed then, quiet, breathless laughter that melted the edge off everything. Louise's shoulders loosened for the first time in days. A boat horn sounded somewhere far out on the water, its low rumble drifting across the inlet. A flock of birds lifted into the air in a sudden burst, wings catching the light like silver brushstrokes. The world seemed to pause just enough for a choice to form. Louise stepped the final inch forward. Can I? She didn't finish the question. Nicole nodded, very slow, very sure. Louise reached out, fingertips brushing the side of Nicole's hand. The contact was feather-light, hesitant, a quiet question in the shape of touch. Nicole turned her palm up, offering it. Louise's fingers slid into hers, intertwining in a way that felt like a memory and a beginning at once. The warmth of it traveled straight up Nicole's arm. Louise whispered, I don't want to be afraid of this anymore. Nicole squeezed her hand. Then don't be. Louise lifted her other hand, cupping Nicole's cheek with a softness that made Nicole close her eyes. Their foreheads touched, breath mingling. This time, there was no rush, no trembling retreat, just two people arriving where they were always meant to arrive, slowly, deliberately, with the tenderness of someone handling something precious. Their lips met, gentle, patient, full of emotion rather than urgency. A kiss that didn't demand anything but offered everything. Louise deepened it only after Nicole leaned in first, a silent exchange of yes, I'm here, yes, I want this too. When they parted, their noses brushed, breaths still intertwined. Louise exhaled a small, shaky laugh. That felt different. Better? Nicole asked, her voice low, still catching. Louise nodded. Better. Real. They stood like that for a long time, holding hands, letting silence settle around them like a warm shawl. The breeze lifted the loose thread on Nicole's blazer again. Louise noticed and gently pinched it between her fingers. You know, she whispered, you don't have to fix everything at once. Nicole looked down at the frayed edge. Maybe not. But I think I'm finally ready to try. Louise smiled, small and luminous. We can fix things slowly. Together. Nicole's heart swelled with something fierce and bright. They walked along the water afterward, side by side, hands occasionally brushing, their shadows stretching long in the amber light. They talked about small things, Louise's night shifts, Nicole's new office, how Mr. Darcy preferred sleeping on clean laundry. The simplicity of it felt like healing. Like permission. Like choosing each other gently instead of all at once. When the sun dipped low, Louise stopped. I don't know how this will look tomorrow, she said honestly. But I know I want tomorrow with you. Nicole swallowed the soft ache rising in her chest. Then tomorrow, she whispered, and this time it wasn't a delay, it was a promise. Louise leaned in and kissed her forehead, slow and tender. A new kind of intimacy, warm and grounding. Nicole closed her eyes, letting the moment sink through her ribs. They said goodbye at the edge of the path. Louise lingered, her hands slipping from Nicole's slowly, fingers trailing as the space widened between them. She turned once, eyes full of something deep and certain, before stepping into the soft glow of evening. Nicole watched her go, breath steady, heart full. At home, she placed her blazer on the table. The loose thread brushed the wood, no longer looking like something broken, just a reminder of the fabric she was ready to reweave. Sometimes we unravel only so we can stitch ourselves back with truth. What part of their journey made your heart pause? If this story touched your heart, share your truth in the comments. And if this journey stayed with you, please consider subscribing to Secret Garden Stories, leaving a comment, and sharing it with friends, forums, and social media. Your support helps this channel grow and build a world with more love and less prejudice. Tulip. Thank you for being here.